Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for an evening of true terrifying tales that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. This week, we have 11 true tales of terror to share with you, the largest collection of horror stories yet, thanks to our listeners. If you have a story to share, be sure to reach out via the details listed in the description. If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. All of these actions tell YouTube you want to hear more from us. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1. The Most Horrifying Camp with My Friends by Den. It was October 29th, 2024, and we were all 15. About 2 weeks before, I had organized a Halloween meetup with my 3 childhood friends at my house, which is pretty isolated. Set far away from the city and near some empty farms. It's been a tradition every year to invite my friends over to camp out in a tent outside my house, but this time I wanted to add some extra excitement. For privacy, I'll call my friends Ray, G, and Adam. Ray was the funny, tall, and average-built one. G was shorter, but super chill, the kind of friend you could always relax with. Adam was my best childhood friend. We'd hung out almost every day each summer since we were 10 and had been in the same class for 6 years straight. They planned to arrive around 2 p.m., and we aimed to head to our camp area by 4 p.m. Ray and Adam arrived first, so we set up snacks, packed our backpacks, and just joked around like any other 15-year-olds. We planned to get to the camp area using a couple of motorized bicycles and my dirt bike. I had my dirt bike, Adam had his own motorized bicycle, and I also had a second bike that Ray could use. But soon we realized that Adam's bike had a busted clutch cable. We spent a while trying to fix it, but we only made things worse. By the time G showed up at 3:30, we had to adjust our plan. We decided that I'd take G on the dirt bike, Adam would ride my other bike, and Ray would wait back at my house while I made a return trip to pick him up once we got the others set up at the camp. The camp area was about 8 kilometers away, requiring us to cross a quiet highway and then follow a bumpy, gravelly farm road. This camp area wasn't anything official, just a flag spot in the middle of a field where I liked to go chill and clear my thoughts. By the time G and I arrived, it was already getting dark, so I rushed back to get Ray. When we finally all gathered at the spot, G and Adam had already set up the firewood, but hadn't lit the fire yet. It was pitch black, and the place felt eerier than usual. We got the fire going and started grilling sausages, enjoying the solitude. The area is always empty. No one ever uses that road. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a helicopter fly over us. We laughed nervously, wondering if they'd spotted the fire and thought it was some sort of cult gathering. About 3 minutes later, we saw car headlights off in the distance, maybe 2 kilometers away. The car seemed to just be sitting there, with its lights on, but after a few moments it turned them off. We thought it was weird, but didn't give it too much thought. Then we noticed a massive tractor, one of those with crop-cutting blades in front, slowly moving through the field about 200 meters away. We didn't think anything of it at first, but then it started heading straight toward us. We quickly moved our bikes and bags out of the way, but the tractor kept getting closer, like it had no intention of stopping. At the last second, I grabbed our helmets and moved them just before the tractor rolled over the fire, extinguishing it. Then it stopped right there, turned off its lights, and just stood still. It was pitch dark, and we couldn't see inside the cab. We all stood there, creeped out, wondering why it would almost run us over and then just stop. The tractor stayed in place for what felt like an eternity. None of us could see a thing inside, and the thought that someone was just sitting there, silently watching us, gave us chills. Finally, I told everyone to pack up as fast as possible. 2 of my friends somehow squeezed onto the back of my dirt bike, and Adam got onto the motorized bike. We sped off, with one of my friends clinging on and nervously looking back. He said the tractor was still just sitting there in the dark, without its lights on, as we got about 100 meters away. After a tense, silent ride, we finally made it back home about 20 minutes later. We tried to brush it off, only mentioning it once, but the whole experience left us shaken. Now, thinking back, I can't help but wonder what the driver's intentions were. Why would someone drive so close to us, extinguish our fire, then just sit there in silence? I keep imagining that while we were staring into that dark cab, maybe the driver had already slipped out of the tractor, silently watching us from behind one of the wheels, hidden in the shadows just a few steps away for those straight 5 minutes. The thought sends chills down my spine. Story 2. What is Happening in Central Texas? By NaidaBelle. Last Thursday, I, 34 female, spent the day hanging out with my friend, 20 female, in the Texas Hill Country. Her family home is out in the hills, aka the boonies, where everyone lives on large acreage and you can easily go a mile without seeing a guard light, never mind a house. In front and behind their property are sparsely wooded pasture. Neighbors on one side are a stone's throw away and know the family by name. On the other side, they're well acquainted but live far enough that they drive a side-by-side when they come to visit. There's enough traffic on the road for the county to maintain a patchwork oil top, but not enough to be bothered painting the faded center stripe. I explain all of this so y'all are not just aware of the landscape I'm in, but also why there is zero fucking reason for anyone to be here after dark that isn't meant to be. Late in the evening, about 10 to 11, I spent an hour alone on the well-lit porch of the main house, having a serious conversation on the phone with my partner who's currently long distance. The entire time, I forced myself to power through the sensation of being watched. It was unsettling, but didn't feel dangerous enough to warrant going inside where I'd lose signal. Towards the end of my call, my friend comes out to have a smoke, and we chat a little more before she takes me home. I live in town, and since we weren't quite done talking, we hung out in her car at my apartment complex until about 1 a.m. I tell her to text me when she got home to know she made it safe and share some pictures we had talked about. She does, and I assume all is well until the following morning. After going back and forth about whether it would sound crazy, she calls me to tell me that there was a gigantic barn owl just sitting in the middle of the road about a quarter mile before her house. The damn thing doesn't seem spooked at all that she's almost hit it, and just sits there, staring in her direction, until she manages to move around it and finish her drive home. We've grown up with conflicting folklore about whether this is a good or bad omen, but ultimately drop it. The night before last, she and another friend bring me to a kickback at the family home of the second friend about a mile from the first place. Throughout the night, despite their large backyard being fenced, I still cannot shake the feeling of being watched. I chalk it up to being nervous, and anyone who might be watching me is doing so because I'm a newcomer to the social group. We're all a little too tipsy for me to go all the way back to town, so I go home with my first friend to the property I described before. Same feeling while having smoke on the porch before calling it a night, and I assume she was getting it on with her husband after she went into their bedroom, because I swear I can vaguely hear them on a baby monitor. When I teased her yesterday morning about solving her horny problem, she denies they've done anything, and she's not shy about her sex life. And he later confirmed separately that they were too cross-fated to do anything but sleep. I found out later that the monitor was off. I spent the entire day with my friend, hanging out with her family, making a couple trips into town, etc. Just before sunset, we stopped by a third friend's place to pick up some stuff, and he repeatedly teases his kid about riding an e-bike through the pasture because the skinwalkers will get ya. Unbeknownst to me, my friend is equally spooked by how many times he says it, because she has also been feeling watched since the night before. While sitting on the porch again, chatting and eating some finger-licking, slap-your-grandma, this-could-have-been-my-last-meal-good stir-fry her husband made for us, I get an unexpected phone call from my own partner at about 10 p.m. We're barely a few minutes into the call before my friend and I start to repeatedly hear a strange noise we can't identify. I tell my man to hold on a second while I turn down the volume on my speakerphone, trying to figure out what the noise is. While I'm listening intently to see if it's coming from his end of the line, my friend's face becomes progressively more terrified. Suddenly, there's the sound of what can only be described as a mortally wounded animal screaming. Y'all, I've heard plenty of wildlife and livestock sounds in my life. This ain't no goat, sheep, cow, horse, chicken, dog, cat, coyote, whitetail, or axis I've ever heard. Bobcats and pumas don't strike the fear of the Lord into you that this thing did. It ain't no curse-sounding fox, and it definitely ain't any overexcited squirrel. We said fuck every worldly possession we had, including our plates of that god-tier stir-fry and her car keys, and bolted indoors with only the phones in our hands. It's only after my partner has heard this commotion and our call dropped due to lost signal that my friend and I ask each other again, what the fuck was that? After agreeing neither of us could identify what animal made that sound, she tells me the most horrific part. The earlier sound that was repeating as it made its way down the fence line and came to a stop at her front gate, the last 3 times it repeated, she distinctly heard a voice saying, "Hey! Hey, come here!" After locking up, we decided we'd go back to clean our stuff off the porch after the sun comes up this morning. While she's been in bed with her husband and baby, I've been sitting awake in the living room on the pull-out bed. Listening to the jump scares of the ice maker, the occasional knock on the wall, the odd soft scratch at the door, and the vague baby monitor voices from the previous night again. The only part of this story worse than losing almost an entire plate of stir-fry, topped with the most perfectly spiced beef and mushrooms that I was too cowardly to die for, is that it's not fiction. I'm watching the clock with my shoes on, too scared to sleep before dawn. Update. After my friend woke up, she told me about the angry text she received from her mother about the mess we left on the porch. She said she had come outside to smoke at 2:45 a.m., and all was normal except for the fight their pit bulls had over my almost full plate. At first, she accused us of laziness and didn't take things that seriously. After we sat down with her and fully explained what happened, she cut us some slack for being afraid, but still insisted that we basically fed off each other's fear and convinced ourselves the incident was worse than it truly was. Creepy sounds just happen late at night, out in the country sometimes. Over the course of the day, doing housework, playing with the baby, talking about my impending engagement and wedding plans, we began to convince ourselves that her mother might have been right. Until she took me home. She put the baby down at 6:30 p.m., and with her husband there to hold down the fort, immediately drove me home. At 7, just as we were settling in at my place, her mother calls to tell us that the dogs were alerting in an extremely aggressive way to the opposite side of the garage, a huge garage that my friend's apartment is built in, the side that their bedroom window is on. Growling, snarling, fur bristled, very out of character for them. When she peeked around the corner to see what they were reacting to, nothing was there. Even after she calmed them down and coaxed them back to the porch of the main house, they would not stop staring at the garage. When my friend returned home a bit after midnight, she called me to make sure she made it into her place safely because she had felt the creepy watched feeling again, but made it inside uneventfully. As far as I know, nothing new has happened in the last 24 hours. If there are any further updates, I'll be sure to let you know. Story 3. Inexplicable Occurrence in Red River Gorge, Kentucky by Then Building 9493. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this incident and wanted to see if it resonates with anyone else. Me, 28-year-old male, my wife, 28-year-old female, and dog, male, 3, recently went to Red River Gorge, a state park in southeast Kentucky. We're no strangers to camping in the park, having been there at least 20 times over the past 8 years. We chose a spot I've been to 2 to 3 times before. It's worth noting that this site is outside of other dispersed camping areas, and is essentially the only proper spot with car parking along a 2-mile stretch of road. There's a dilapidated barn about a mile up from where we drove in, and a cemetery about a third of a mile in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it's a rarely traveled road, and we saw no one all day, just an occasional car, maybe 1 or 2 an hour. The spot is at the base of a 30-foot incline that a 4x4 could handle. Our SUV was parked horizontally at the top, blocking other vehicles from descending. From there, it's about 30 yards into the campground, with another slope leading to the river's edge and swimming hole. The day went great. We spent time near the beach, letting our dogs swim, then did typical camping activities like hiking, foraging, chopping wood, throwing the hatchet, and enjoying a few beers. Once sunlight began to fade around 6:30, we started the fire and began cooking dinner. As darkness fell and the last light disappeared, we heard the usual sounds: squirrels rustling, things falling into the leaves, which spooked my wife a bit, but we didn't think much of it. Then, at about 9 p.m., sitting around the healthy fire and listening to music, we heard heavy shuffling in the leaves, definitely something large or heavy. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the road, about halfway between us and our car. I stopped the music, and after about 10 seconds of dead silence, we heard the shuffling again. Before I could call out, we heard this strange and unnatural noise, something like a throttling, ascending pitch mixed with a shriek. Neither of us can verbally describe it, and I can confidently say I've never heard anything like it before. It was about 20 to 25 feet away, just outside the reach of my headlamp. Our dog went insane, hair standing on end, barking incessantly into the darkness. He was on a long lead, or I'm sure he would have taken off after it. My wife and I were frozen. I was holding my hatchet and trying to catch any movement or sound to track. After about 2 to 3 minutes of that, with no further noises, I calmed the dog, and we grabbed some essentials and hurried to the car. Our adrenaline was pumping as we discussed coyotes, foxes, or other animals as the possible culprits. I didn't want to mention the possibility of people, as that would have heightened the paranoia. We eventually passed out after about an hour, but I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep, feeling very uncomfortable both mentally and physically. I've always struggled to sleep any way except fully horizontal. At around 3 a.m., right next to my head, I heard a singular knock on my window, like someone tapped the glass with one knuckle. My wife didn't wake up, and I scanned the outside of the car, but didn't see or hear anything. I struggled to doze off again, and my heartbeat was rapid. When we finally got the first light around 7 a.m., we cooked breakfast, packed up our campsite, and got the hell out of Dodge. No prints or anything out of sorts with our remaining belongings either. What's strange to me is that after hearing the noise, we heard no additional heavy shuffling from the source. With our dog barking so aggressively, we should have heard whatever it was moving away. We've looked up various animal noises native to the gorge, and nothing even remotely resembles what we heard. The knock on the window was also isolated. There were no other noises or visible happenings outside the car immediately following. Lastly, I had a thought the day after we left. I remember whistling for our dog after dark, since we had some scraps to give him near the fire. Immediately I thought, shit, I shouldn't have whistled. But up until this trip, I've never been a believer of those superstitions. I just like to respect the folklore I've heard. In hindsight, we're now convinced I may have invited a Wendigo or Skinwalker to our camp. I won't take those superstitions lightly again. And I'm sure this occurrence will affect at least my next few overnights in those woods. Story 4. The Most Hateful Haunting by Anonymous. We were a military family who moved quite often. Of all the 14 homes I have lived in, this house was the most intense haunting I have ever experienced. From the moment we stepped foot in that house, I could feel an insane heavy weight and darkness there. There were a few bizarre things about this house. For one, someone was watching me. I felt as if I was being stalked in this house every moment of every day. I can remember how uneasy I felt. The 2 rooms I despised the most were my parents' bathroom and my own bedroom. At the time, I was around 10 or 11 years old, and my brother was about 15 or 16. We had chores as normal kids do, and one of those had to do with cleaning parts of every bathroom in the house, including my parents'. My brother and I both refused to go into my parents' bathroom. I have no idea how to describe this feeling. There were many mirrors in the bathroom, and it felt like someone was standing right behind you at all times in here. At 26, the thought of this room gives me chills to this day. My mother did not question our concern and never forced us to be in there, thank God. My bedroom was the worst for me. I did not spend much time in here as I felt the most seen in this room, and the dread I felt was immense. I would go to sleep every night hiding under the covers because it made me feel better, because I knew someone or something was watching me. I would hear whispers in this room, and my door would sway some nights. I felt as though my bed was a table that people were congregating around, as the whispers were different people in different spaces around me. I could never make out what they were saying, but to be honest, I did not try to hear them. I ignored them every night. I was lucky enough to have a box TV in my room, and it sat on my tall dresser. One day, I'm in my room watching TV, laying in front of the dresser. I get this image in my head of the whole thing toppling over me, killing me. I disregard the idea as the dresser is real wood, extremely heavy with the added TV on top. The dresser handles start to move, and the dresser sways a bit by itself. I got up and never laid in front of it again. My brother and I would hear footsteps throughout the night. A few times we thought it must be a break-in, but it never was. I never physically saw anything in this house, but I have never had a more fearful, intense, and horrible feeling living somewhere. Story 5. Haunted ICU Ward. First off, I swear on everything, the story is as accurate as I remember it, and in no way, shape, or form made up. About a year and a half ago, I worked maintenance at an older hospital. Around 11 p.m., the fire alarm goes off. It's part of our responsibility to investigate and be sure there isn't a real fire. So the other maintenance guy and I look at the fire panel to see which alarm is activated. It's showing a smoke detector in the old cardiac ICU as the culprit. Mind you, this unit has been empty since early 2020 when the new unit was finished being built. So we step off the elevator, go through the locked double doors, and walk down the dark, dimly lit hallway around the corner. We come up to the nurses' station, and it's fully staffed with critical patients in almost every room. We didn't really think much of it at the time, but something that stuck out to us was everyone seemed to stop what they were doing, and in complete silence, just stared at both of us. We figured they must have moved back, and since we're the evening shift, no one told us. We locate the activated smoke detector, verify there is no smoke or fire, and go back to the panel to clear out the alarms and notify the fire department that there is no fire. The very next day or so, we're back in the same unit replacing light bulbs or something. This time, every single room is full of furniture, extra beds, chairs, etc., and the whole ward is a mess that looks like it hasn't been touched in years. Dust on the desks, stains on ceiling tiles, trash piled up, computer monitors unplugged, and stuff along those lines to insinuate that the unit is still closed. Story 6. I may have encountered a ghost on the Gettysburg battlefield. About 3 years ago, I was a student at Gettysburg College, located near where the Battle of Gettysburg occurred, an extremely big and bloody battle of the American Civil War. The college itself is located in the town, and it isn't hard to walk to various spots on the battlefield. There was a string of really warm days in February that year, and I took advantage of them by going on long walks. However, while it was warm on this particular day, it was also extremely rainy and windy. But I said screw it and walked the few miles to Culp's Hill, where there's a metal lookout tower. It's the kind of tower where every time you take a step up the stairs, it makes a metallic clanking sound and the whole tower vibrates a bit. Because the weather was so nasty, no one was there when I arrived. I walked up to the top of the tower and just hung out for a while, looking around and catching my breath after the long walk. Then, all of a sudden, I could hear the sounds of someone walking up the steps. The tower is tall enough that you can't see the ground without actually looking down, so I remember being surprised there was someone else weird enough to be visiting the tower in such bad weather. However, after about 10 seconds, the footsteps stopped and did not start back up again. I assumed that whoever it was had decided the steps were too slippery and had turned back. Again, curious to see who it could be, as there was no one there when I arrived, I went to the edge of the tower and looked around. There were no cars. There was no one standing near the tower or walking away from it. In other words, there was no one that could have made those steps. What are your thoughts on this story? I've never been one to really take ghost stories super seriously, but I've never been one to completely dismiss their existence either. Gettysburg is a very popular destination for ghost hunters. In fact, Gettysburg College has been called one of the most haunted college campuses in the U.S. What struck me with this experience is that the thought of it being a ghost encounter never crossed my mind until the very end. A lot of stories of people encountering ghosts read as, well, I really wanted or thought it would happen, so it did. But for me, I just thought someone else was heading up the tower. That's why realizing there was no one around was so shocking to me. This is the only ghostly experience I've ever had, and it sticks with me to this day. Story 7. My Ghost Experience at Fairfield Hills by Mad No More. During the 2007 Christmas break from college, some friends and I went to Connecticut to my friend's girlfriend's mansion for a week. We got bored really quickly and somehow ended up on the idea that his girlfriend, who we'll call Meg, was going to drive us around and show us some of the really haunted areas around her house. We went to a few different spots to see what others see, and were able to easily discount the things that people had seen, and that we saw, as headlight flares and reflections, weird lightning stuff, etc. It was boring, to be honest. Then she told us about Fairfield Hills. She told us that someone had died there, or close to it, and that even though you were allowed to drive through the road that led around the property, you were not allowed to stop your car for any reason. You were not allowed to trespass for any reason, and being caught meant being arrested. She told us she had a friend go missing in high school who was dedicating a whole website to that place, and it had scared her since. If you know this place, you know that all 13 abandoned buildings are connected by underground tunnels, and that a lot of bad stuff has happened here. It's supposed to be one of the most haunted places in the U.S. After she drove us through the property the first time the next day, she didn't want to go there at night. The three of us boys had the wise idea that we were going to break into one of these buildings and see if it was really haunted or not. We went to a store and grabbed a small crowbar, about 5 pounds probably. We waited until dark, and then we peer-pressured Meg into taking us there. She was adamant that you cannot stop or park your car, and that we would be arrested if we got caught. This led us to the decision that we would specifically try to break into the U-shaped big building, using a door on the interior of its courtyard, so that we would not be seen as easily. Little did we know at the time that this was the building where they performed the electroshock therapy, and was easily the most haunted and vile building of them all. For some context, it was me and 2 buddies that I had been friends with from elementary school all the way through college. One of them, we'll call him Ethan, was the #1 jock in every sport all through high school, and I've never seen him back down from anything. He is also a staunch non-believer in all things supernatural. The other friend, we'll call him Brian, was 1 year ahead of me in high school, and had done ROTC in high school, and then did 1 tour in the Middle East before coming back and joining us in college. He has been in multiple firefights and had an IED go off not far from him. This guy likes to fight multiple people at a time when parties go south. Again, he's never backed down from anything. He is neither a believer or a non-believer. Prove it to me is his stance. Then there's me. Small guy, asthmatic, also never backed down from anything, but basically because I never took anything seriously. Also, I am a believer in something supernatural, but not sure what. Like my army friend, I just keep that mental door open. So Meg agrees to drive us under these rules. She will drive through the place, she will slow down to a roll, and we kill the dome lights and just jump out. She will then continue through the property and drive back around through, twice, and if we don't jump out at the same point by the second trip, she was leaving and we were to sneak off the property alone and meet her at a landmark. She was extremely adamant about not stopping or waiting at all, afraid of getting arrested. She was also scared as hell. She is a local and she didn't have any interest in messing with that place. That gives us about 25 minutes total to break in, a walk around, and 13-ish minutes to catch her on the first trip around. We put the plan in action. No flashlights, just the 3 of us and I with a mini crowbar. We entered the courtyard of the big building and found a raised set of concrete steps leading to a normal-sized entry door. It was so dark in that courtyard, but through the little window in the door, we could see what appeared to be a wall of handcuffs and, like, chains or straps fastened to the wall. It was creepy. I stepped in front of Brian and Ethan with the crowbar and raised it to the door. I never would have gotten that big beast open, but I was going to at least try. As I raised the crowbar, 5 pounds at most, mind you, and pressed it into the gap of the door, I felt the crowbar become 150 pounds in my hand, and it just flew to the ground. I mean, I'm getting sweats and anxiety just thinking about it. It's kind of a blur, to be honest, but like slow motion at the same time. I mean, I felt that bar get ripped out of my hand. I will never forget it. Ever. As soon as it happened, I mumbled something like, "That was weird," and bent down to pick up the bar. I bent over forward and picked up the bar, and it felt as light and normal as in the beginning. I gripped the bar and I heard Brian scream, "What the fuck?" Remember, we were supposed to be as quiet as possible, and this dude knows how to follow orders under pressure. I stood up and turned quickly behind me, and as I did, Brian, who was the one standing directly behind me when I tried to pry the door open, was taking off down the concrete steps at full speed. He ran right through Ethan, who took one look at me and just yelled, "Run!" and took off behind Brian. At this point, we weren't being discreet at all, so we just kept running to our spot, and I didn't have a clue what was going on at that point. All I know is they ran, so I ran, and that something just did not feel right. We got to the bushes, and Brian and Ethan are just shoulder punching and pushing each other, saying, "What the fuck? Did you see that?" Their hearts were pounding so much they could barely get enough breath to talk. At the time, I was just laughing inside, thinking, these are two of the toughest people I know, and I have never seen them scared. And I was more worried about getting arrested at that point. I wasn't even processing the crowbar incident yet, as the whole thing went down faster than you can read my words. Within about a minute, luckily, a car came down the way, going super slow, and it was Meg. She stops, and we all go run and get into the car quickly, and she's telling us, "Get in, the security car is lapping the road and definitely saw me." And she just wants to get out of there. We got into the car and started driving, and Brian and Ethan were just blankly staring while Meg was asking what the hell happened. Ethan turns on the dome light and turns to Brian and says, "Dude, what just happened?" To which I reply, "Yeah, what's going on, dude? Did you smack that crowbar out of my hand or something? Was there an alarm?" Brian turned toward me to say something. Then he looked past my head at the back window of the car, and his eyes lit up wide. He then grabbed me by the throat and started punching me in the shoulder, saying, "That isn't funny, dude. What kind of prank is this?" I freak out, defending myself, saying, "I don't know what you mean, dude." He turned my head with his hands and said, "You didn't just write that? Bullshit." And right there, written on the inside of the curved back window in the condensation, it says, "Help me," with a line stemming from the bottom of the E to the edge of the window, like it was being written while the car was driving. After the argument you'll read about below, and adamantly swearing they did not hit the crowbar out of my hand, they tell me this. When I dropped the crowbar trying to break into the building, I bent down to pick it up. As I bent down to pick it up, my upper torso was replaced with the upper half of a ghost woman. The upper half of a woman in a veil and a wavy dress or blouse, directly inside of where my upper body had been. White and green smoky transparency was the description I got. Her ghost head was exactly where my head had just been. Brian was 1 foot behind me, and he said he was all of a sudden 1 foot away, staring eye to eye with a ghost woman. He said he felt terror beyond what he thought was even possible, and just immediately took off running as fast as he could. Ethan, who was watching our backs at the time, turned when Brian yelled and took off, and when he looked back he saw a rougher version of the same thing, but he said it was inside of the building looking out the window, and that fear just took him over instantly, and he followed Brian running. I don't care if you believe me. Let's be clear about that. You have to know these people the way I know these two guys to be able to believe. Even they don't entirely believe it all because they have the benefit of thinking that I was the one who wrote the words on the windshield, the explanation to which I will write below. But in the end, I am the only person who knows that it was impossible for any of us to write it, and the only one who knows how it felt in the moment that crowbar came out of my hands. I'll spare you the dialogue of our 4-person screaming match that followed Brian seeing the words on the window, but here are the important parts. I am the only person who had sat in that particular seat the entire day and evening, and that writing was not there when we got dropped off. Meg could not have done it under any circumstances because A, she never stopped the car, and was adamant that until we left the area she would not, and she didn't even stop the dang car fully so we could get in easier. B, she had long enough fingernails and simply could not have written what was there without making other marks. C, Meg was livid when I said the words were not written by me. She was so upset, in fact, she threatened to not let me back to her house or drive me back to college if I didn't admit it. It took the entire night just to get them to stop attacking me because it was literally affecting their sanity. D, that would have been the first and only prank she ever played on us, and we loved pranking each other, so eventually she would have told us to claim her victory. It would have been too good of a moment to pass up, at least at some point over the next year when she and Ethan were still together or in the breakup. Brian and Ethan never let it go. Every few weeks, then months, then years. Just tell me, man, you wrote that on the window, right? They don't bring it up anymore, and last time I did, they didn't want to talk about it. I thought they'd just believe me in the end, but I'm pretty sure now they just can't accept it. We Googled that place a lot after that night, and sure enough, the most common accusations about that place are white silhouettes and words written in windows. I don't know what happened that night, but I'm telling you right now, it wasn't nothing. Story 8. The Man at the Bus Stop by ThirdDaily.com. So this weird thing happened to me a while back, and I still get creeped out thinking about it. I was waiting for the bus one night after a long shift at work. It was dark, and the street lights kept flickering, making everything feel kinda off. As I stood there scrolling through my phone, I noticed this guy across the street at the bus stop. He looked kinda shady, worn-out clothes and this intense stare that made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore him, telling myself I was just being paranoid. A few minutes passed, and I looked up again. The guy was still there, but now he was staring right at me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought maybe he was just waiting for someone, so I tried to shake it off. Then my bus finally showed up. I hopped on and found a seat by the window. As we started driving away, I looked back, and there he was, still watching me. My stomach dropped. The bus ride felt way too long. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see him following us. When I finally got off at my stop, I rushed to my apartment, trying to shake off that creepy feeling. But then, the next night, I had to wait for the bus again. And guess what? That same guy was there. He was even closer this time, and I was freaking out. I couldn't wait for my bus to come. When the bus arrived, I practically jumped on and sat down, but I was still nervous. I kept looking back, thinking he was somehow connected to me. I couldn't help it. Finally, I got off at my stop again and rushed home. I decided I would avoid that bus stop for a while. But a few nights later, I thought, it's probably all in my head, and went back out. Guess who was there? Yep, the same guy. This time, he had this creepy smile on his face. I got on the bus again, my heart racing. I was sure he was coming after me. When I finally got off, I sprinted home, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every little noise. Days went by, and I finally decided to switch up my routine. I took a different bus line and went out of my way to avoid that guy. But one night, I got on a bus, and there he was, sitting right across from me. I was frozen. He stared at me and then leaned in closer, whispering, "I've been waiting for you." My heart dropped. I bolted off the bus at the next stop and didn't stop running until I got home. I locked the door and sat in my living room, trying to figure everything out. The next morning, I decided to report him to the police. I told them what happened, but they looked at me like I was crazy. They said there wasn't much they could do unless he did something to me. I started carrying pepper spray and asked friends to walk with me to the bus stop. One night, I was out with friends and completely forgot about the guy. We were laughing and having a great time. But when I was walking home, I passed that old bus stop and felt my heart drop. Guess who was waiting there? Yep, that creepy dude. He wasn't just staring this time. He was right in front of the bus stop, looking like he was waiting for me. I couldn't believe it. I turned to walk away, but he shouted, "You can't run from me forever!" I ran home like I was being chased. That was it for me. I never went back to that bus stop. I found a new job closer to home, started taking Ubers, and did everything I could to avoid that part of town. It's been years, and I still think about that guy. Did he mean to scare me? Was he just a creep, or was there something more to him? Honestly, I'm just glad I never found out. Story 9. My Paranormal Stories. I thought I'd share 2 paranormal stories that have happened to me over the years. This is going to be long, but I'll try to tell it in the best way possible to keep it entertaining. English isn't my first language, so I hope everything is clear. My first paranormal experience happened when I was just a kid, probably not more than 10 years old. I was visiting a friend who lived in a small town, while I lived in the city. We used to spend afternoons playing video games together. My friend lived with his grandmother in a big house, and his grandmother's brother, who was terminally ill, also lived there. He was a frail old man with pale skin, white hair, and light blue eyes. I rarely saw him, but I always felt uneasy around him. We referred to him as Uncle. His room was right across from my friend's, and one of the house rules was no closed doors. One day we were playing and making a lot of noise when I saw the grandmother's brother sit up on his bed through the partially open door. I saw his legs move as he sat up, and I told my friend and another friend who was with us to keep the volume down because we'd woken his uncle up. At that moment, my friend turned to me with wide eyes and asked me to repeat what I'd just said. I told him again that his uncle was awake. My only concern was that he'd tell us off for being too loud. Then my friend looked seriously at me and said that his grandmother's brother had died about a month and a half ago. I insisted that I'd seen him sit up in bed, and even saw him move. We all got really scared and ran out of the room. We ended up telling his grandmother, and she said she sometimes still felt her brother's presence in the house and wasn't surprised I'd seen him. She herself sometimes thought she saw him out of the corner of her eye while doing chores. After that scare, we moved the game console to the downstairs living room, and my friend even switched bedrooms with his grandmother. He was pretty shaken up and told me he couldn't sleep. The second story happened during my high school years. I don't remember exactly what year, but I was still young. One summer, I went to visit my grandfather, who lived in the countryside. That night, there was a party in the community, and my mother and brother decided to go, but I stayed with my grandfather. After dinner, I went outside to play with my grandfather's dog, since he was watching TV. The patio was dark, except for the porch light meters away. I was playing with the dog when suddenly I saw a figure moving on the porch. The figure was ethereal, like a white mist moving in the air. I couldn't make out all the limbs, but I could see the shape and movement, which was exactly like my grandmother's. My grandmother, who had died earlier that year, had walked with difficulty, always using crutches, and she had a very distinct, slow way of moving. I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I thought I was imagining things. The dog didn't seem disturbed, though we were a bit far from the porch. But I watched as the figure walked across the porch and went inside the house. I was more confused than scared, so after a while I went inside and started looking for the strange figure. At first I didn't see anything, but then I went into the guest room where my mom, brother, and I usually stayed. Just as I was about to change into my pajamas, I saw a small ball of light float from the bedside lamp. It moved from the lamp, or maybe from the pillow, I'm not sure, and drifted toward the door that led to the living room. I peeked in, but it was gone. When my mother came back from the party, I told her everything, but she just said I'd imagined it and asked me not to tell my grandfather or brother. Apparently, my grandfather had been having strange dreams and visions lately, and this would only make it worse. These are two paranormal experiences that have really stuck with me, but my first encounter with a ghost happened in my own home. One day, I was in the living room with my grandmother, who lived with us in her final years. We were having a snack together, and then I went to the bathroom. Before reaching the hallway, I saw a tall figure with a hat walking toward me. Instinctively, I stepped aside to let it pass and was left shocked, not knowing what I'd just seen. My grandmother noticed something was up and asked me what was wrong. When I told her about the man in the hat, she just scolded me and told me to stop talking nonsense, so that was the end of it. I have to admit, even though these stories sound scary, I was usually more confused than frightened, except when I saw my friend's uncle's ghost. That time, I was terrified. My aunt, my mother's sister, has also seen ghosts since she was young, so I guess it's somewhat normal in our family. My aunt has had several paranormal encounters and even saw her grandmother's spirit after she passed. Her house is also supposedly haunted by a dog spirit, and she once claimed to have seen my grandmother in her bedroom. If anyone has any theories or explanations for these encounters, feel free to share them in the comments, or let me know if you've had similar experiences. I'd love to hear them. Story 10. I went hiking with a guy, and he showed me a dead body. This started when I was at my childhood friend's apartment for what was supposed to be a fun little movie night. We hadn't hung out in a while, and we were catching up. Her place was cozy, a little disorganized, and full of girly decor. We were in our comfiest sweatpants about to watch princess movies. Her apartment isn't the most tidy. Things are a bit scattered around, but it's clean and so authentic, which always made me feel at home. We decided on ordering pizza for dinner. She mentioned that Sherwood, someone I hadn't met yet, would bring the pizza over. At first, I was not happy to hear that. I thought that she meant she had invited other friends, a boy, over to join us, which wasn't what I had in mind. But I was in for a surprise. Sherwood turned out to just be our delivery guy for the night. He wasn't joining us. When he got to the apartment, there was this awkward air about him. He was obviously nervous, fumbling a bit with the pizza boxes and not quite making eye contact. My friend introduced us quickly, and it was clear from her overly thankful demeanor that Sherwood did a lot more for her than just fetch dinner. After handing us the pizza, there was this brief moment of forced small talk. My friend was super nice to him despite his awkwardness. He wasn't the best conversationalist and seemed really out of place. Then Sherwood asked for my number. I was in a tough spot because our mutual friend was sitting right there, so I just gave it to him. We chatted for maybe 5 minutes before my friend gave him a cue to leave with something like, "Thanks so much for dropping this off." He seemed to get the hint. We both gave him a hug before my friend said something like, "Drive safe," giving him another kind of cue to leave. When I asked my friend what that was all about, she basically explained that Sherwood was her unpaid personal assistant. He did her grocery shopping, he dropped off pizza, and he did all this other stuff. I think Sherwood was just really a lonely guy, desperate for interaction, especially female interaction. My friend and I were both young and immature back then. We were about 23, but I think we both knew something was seriously wrong with Sherwood. It was a little hard to articulate because we couldn't point out exactly what his problem was. Sherwood started a group chat with my friend and I. He just sent a meme or two every week. It felt like he was trying to stay relevant without being intrusive. Maybe he was used to being sidelined or even blocked by other girls in the past. It felt like he was trying to make me remember him, but also carefully trying not to give me a reason to block him too. I can't speak on his behalf. That's just what it felt like. Sherwood also offered help with errands. The first time I said, "Thanks for asking, but no." He asked every weekend after that. One day, I made the mistake of accepting his help. I knew better. I had recently found a great deal for a new washing machine on Craigslist, but I had no idea how to pick it up and install it. When I mentioned it in the chat, Sherwood excitedly volunteered to take care of the whole thing. He handled the whole pickup and installation like a total champ, which saved me so much hassle. I tried to pay him for his efforts because I wanted to show appreciation, but he wouldn't accept any money. I insisted. Eventually, he suggested that I could repay him by joining him for a hike. Like, what? I was uneasy about this. It felt a bit too personal and almost like it could be mistaken for a date. But Sherwood framed it as nothing more than a friendly outing, like a transaction to balance out the favor. I agreed to the hike. I rationalized it by telling myself it was fair trade for installing the washing machine, and that it was genuinely a form of payment, especially since I didn't think he had too many friends. This hike felt like maybe a way for him to have some companionship. I thought it might be nice helping him. Part of me was still uneasy about spending time with him in such an isolated setting. The day of the hike, Sherwood picked this trail that was nearby. I had been there before. It's gorgeous. As we walked along together, he chatted about ordinary things like work, the weather, and his hobbies. Everything seemed normal until he suggested we go off the main path to see something special he wanted to share. Like, what could that even mean? We reached this secluded spot, and there, oh my gosh, was a dead body. My heart pounded so violently as Sherwood stood there, so eerily calm and nonchalant. The casualness in his demeanor made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a dead body, but also revealing this darker side of himself. It smelled bad, but not like in the movies. I didn't know how long it had been there. I'm not a biologist, but my guess is that it had smelled a lot worse before, but now it had gone down. At that moment, I mumbled some excuse about needing to get back quickly and started walking briskly toward the main path. I was urging Sherwood to follow me. I thought maybe this was some twisted mind game, like a way to intimidate me or show me that he wasn't just some harmless little boy. Maybe he was trying to send a message that said, "You should know I'm familiar with things like this." Or there's another possibility. Maybe he just wanted me to think about him more. Sometimes when I talk to people, I feel like they only notice me for the time that we're together, and then they won't think of me again until the next time we meet. It's possible Sherwood felt that way with me, and maybe he thought showing me a dead body would make him less forgettable. I have no idea. But on the surface, he seemed oblivious to how inappropriate this was. As we walked back together, I was in full fight-or-flight mode, instinctively looking around to see if there were other hikers or rangers, anyone who could make me feel like I wasn't alone. The moment I spotted someone else on the trail, I called out. Not to expose Sherwood, but just asking for directions back to the parking area. I wanted to make sure Sherwood and I wouldn't be left alone together. I asked this gentleman to walk us back to the parking lot. I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I kept pretending like I was confused about his directions, and eventually he agreed to just walk us there. Getting help from that guy was my way of re-anchoring myself to safety and normality, while I was still under the shock of what Sherwood had shown me. We got to the parking area. There, I called my friend and told her I was with Sherwood. I suggested he could drop me off with her and that we'd be there in 20 minutes. Sherwood agreed. That was my way of making sure that if anything happened, it was on the record that Sherwood was the last person to have been with me. Also, I immediately texted my friend what had happened to get that on the record too. When I got to her apartment, we said thanks to Sherwood and kindly told him to go away. I had already told her through text, but then I started going into all the detail. The fact that the body had insects, the fact that the face was decomposing but still recognizable. Her reaction was pure horror, not just about the dead body, but also how nonchalantly Sherwood had treated the whole situation. She had confessed she always sensed something was off about him, even though she'd never imagined anything this disturbing. We both agreed that we needed to remove Sherwood from our lives. She admitted she felt stuck, and she had become too reliant on Sherwood to just fire him cold turkey. We planned out how we would do it. It was this gradual phasing out plan. We would limit our interaction times to when others were present. We would slowly reduce our responses to his texts. I would never ask for his help again, and my friend would ask for less and less help. Sherwood kept texting during weekends, offering to run errands or asking if we needed anything, to which my friend would reply, "I'm trying to work on being more independent, but you've really been such a help." Eventually, as my friend started dating someone new, she introduced Sherwood to her boyfriend. Sherwood never contacted her after that. I had called the cops the same night of the incident, but it was a while before we heard more news about it. At least a full month later, a news report confirmed discovering a dead body in that area where Sherwood had taken me hiking. They made an arrest, not of Sherwood, but of this other guy that Sherwood followed on Instagram. I have no idea if Sherwood was connected to the murder. Reflecting on everything, I think there's one clear moral of the story. Trust your instincts. Story 11. Haunted by My Deceased Neighbor by Hijinks309. I live in an apartment-style condo. All our entrances are private from the outside, like a motel. This summer, new renters moved into a unit downstairs, catty-corner to me. They were a very sweet older couple in their 80s. I spoke to the wife a bit when our paths crossed, and waved to the husband when I saw him. One morning in late August, I heard a loud smashing or crashing sound, and I ran to my sliding glass door to see that one of the exterior tempered glass windows had shattered. I went outside to investigate and didn't see anything that could have caused this. I checked my security cameras, and nothing. The glass just shattered out of thin air. I shrugged it off and went about my day. A few hours later, my parking lot was filled with emergency services. There was a fire truck and an ambulance, and I saw the state police pull in. And I think, oh no, something has happened to the couple downstairs. I rushed out to make sure they were okay, and the EMT gives me a look. I see the wife is on the porch with her son, bawling. Since she has someone to support her, I go back to my unit and give them space. Later, I found out the husband had passed in his sleep, sometime between 9 a.m. when the wife woke up, and noon when the son came to visit and found him. The window shattered at 10:29 a.m. My neighbor swears it was related. I am skeptical, but what do I know? Fast forward to 3 weeks ago. I hear a knock on my slider door, followed by a slam. My dog gets up and is facing the corner, looking at something I can't see. Her hair is standing up. She's growling. Things in the corner of the room start falling. I calm her down. It was strange to say the least, and I think back to the old man in the window, shrug it off, and go about my day. This past weekend, I'm getting in my Tesla. As I go sit down in the driver's seat, I catch a glimpse of the radar showing a human figure walking alongside the car toward the driver's side front door. I close the door and look up to see nothing there. I turn back to the radar and keep watching. On the screen, I watch as the figure walks up to my door, turns to face it, and pauses for a few seconds before walking back to the driver's side door, where my dogs are anxiously waiting for a joyride. Turns to face it, and pauses for a few seconds before vanishing. A few days later, I tell my husband. He says, "Oh yeah, that happened to me yesterday. It's a system glitch." I saw a human figure walk to the driver's side front door, pause, and vanish. It was the system lagging and showing me walking to the car and getting in. Here's the thing. I don't think that's what was happening. The Tesla radar system has never showed a lag to my knowledge, and it has never done it in the thousands of times I've gotten in the car. The other problem with that theory is the figure did not follow the path I took. I let the dogs into the car and then went back inside to grab something I missed. When I returned, I went right to the driver door and got in. It doesn't track. Fast forward to last night. My husband turns out the lights in the kitchen and living room and goes to bed while I am in the shower. I get out of the shower and head for bed when I notice the kitchen light is on. I grumpily and begrudgingly turn the light out and go to bed. In the night, I wake up and notice the hallway seems illuminated by light from the kitchen and living room. I ignore it and go back to sleep. My husband gets up before me to go to work. This morning, my husband asks me why I left the kitchen light on last night. I didn't. I turned it off. I know I did. My friend made me download some GhostTube app today. I had it on for a few minutes while talking to her on the phone. I thought words or phrases would just appear on the screen. Apparently, the app plays audio it is picking up, so out of nowhere, the app starts speaking, and I freaked out and shut it off. I didn't want to do it. It was against my better judgment because I don't even like thinking about this stuff, and I definitely don't like to mess around with it. I also didn't want to use some potentially scammer app and increase my paranoia, but here we are, spiraling and on Reddit. This just feels like a lot of unexplained weird happenings in a short period of time. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dreadweaver. I'll be back next week with more terrifying true tales. If you would like to submit a story of your own, please head to our subreddit r/thedreadweaver or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications if you want to hear more. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dreadweaver, signing off.